I'm going to look at surds, just basic things about them. Like, what's another way of writing a surd? Well, square root of 81. So that means what number multiplied by itself gives you 81? So 9. So square root of 81 is 9. And you can do that for loads of numbers, square root of 25, 5, etc. Sometimes you don't get a whole number, square root of 26, 5 point something. But what is a surd really? Well, it's actually just another way of writing, like this is a square root. 9 by 9 gives me 81. It's a way of writing a power of a half. They're exactly the same thing. Where would I see this information? You'd see it in your log tables. There's a full page in your log tables and it tells you about indices. And about 3/4 of the way down the page, it starts giving you information on surds. That's because all surds are indices. It's just another way of writing a power that's a fraction. So if that's right, when I type in 81 to the power of a half, I should get 9, because that's just another way of writing the square root of 81. 81 to the power of a half is 9. 25 to the power of 5, or to the power of a half, is 5. Anything to the power of a half is this is just another way of writing the square root of something. So, all surds are indices. They're usually fraction powers, and a square root is the same as the power of a half. So that means all the rules in the log tables that are to do with indices apply to surds as well. Like, there's a rule in your log tables that says a to the power of n times b to the power of n is the same as a times b to the power of n. So what exactly does that mean? It means that, let's say, if a was 5 and b was 6, I'm going to put them to the power of maybe 2. So b is 6 to the power 2. That you can actually go 5 by 6, a by b, and put that to the power of 2. And that would give me 30 to the power of 2. Now, I picked a power that's a whole number. What if I picked a power that wasn't a whole number? Like, what if I picked, let's say maybe the power of a half. Now, the power of a half is the same as the square root. So your power of a half, let's say that was 5 to the power of a half times 6 to the power of a half. Well, that's the same as, so I can just multiply the 5 by the 6, 30 to the power of a half. You wouldn't normally see it looking like this. You'd normally see root 5 times root 6 equals root 30. And you'd be thinking, oh, am I always allowed to multiply those things together? The reason that you're allowed to multiply those things together and then just write it as root 30 is because there's a rule in your log tables that says this is something that is allowed in maths. Because the square root here, you could put a little 2 there if you really wanted to, there's no need to. But square root means it's a power of a half. So it's 5 to the power of a half times 6 to the power of a half gives me 30 to the power of a half. They're just little basic things to do with your surds. The other thing, I guess, that I'll just mention here as a basic thing to do with surds is like, what's the reverse? Like, how do you get rid of a surd almost? Like, you know, if you had a number and you added 5 equals 20, what's the reverse of adding a 5? Like, it's subtracting a 5. So the missing number is 15. But what if you had a surd? What if it was the square root of something is equal to 9? Well, what's the opposite of a surd? It's a square. But if I square one side, I have to square the other. So they're opposites of each other, just like they're opposites of each other. They'll cancel each other out. And I'll be left with x is equal to 81. And that makes sense. The question was, the square root of what number is 9? So squares and square roots are opposites of each other. But it has to be something basic like this. You know, the square root of something to be squared. It has to be something basic like this. That's when they will cancel each other out and just leave you with what's under here. So the last thing that I'll mention then is another just basic thing to do with surds is, I've talked about the square root of 81, so let's talk about the square root of 100. If you go to your calculator, if I ask you straight out, what is the square root of 100? It's 10. So there's only one answer to that, and the answer is 10. Some people get confused because they might get asked the question, what number, when you square it, gives you 100? Now, we've been looking at quadratics, and think about it. It's a power of 2, which means I expect 2 solutions. So what number, when you square it, gives you 100? I have 2 answers. This is straight out asking, if you apply the square root button to the number 100, your only answer is 10. So they're actually, I mean, they're different questions, but they can often confuse people. They'll just assume that the answer to both of those things is 10 and minus 10. No, the reason there's 2 solutions here is because what number, when I square it, gives you 100. I expect 2 answers. However, this is just a straight out operation on the number 100. What is the square root of 100? You can throw it into your calculator. It's just 10.